All right, everybody, welcome back to the Curtain Call. I'm your host, as always, Shayne Kubas, contributor to Still Curtain. And joining me as my co host for this show, normally he has to be in the big boy chair, but for this show, he gets to sit back a little bit more. Tommy Jaggi, editor of Still Curtain. Tommy, we're in full offseason mode with the Steelers, watching the divisional round, and we're going to get into all of that, but definitely disappointing to not be in it at this point with the Bills' loss last week, but lots to look forward to. And I think that overall, we have a lot of things that we can look forward to with the way the offseason could go. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's obviously if we had high hopes, we could be in the race right now. I think that most of us were realistic enough to probably realize that, yeah, we weren't getting there all the way, at least this year. So bounced out early, like kind of like both you and I predicted. But there's a lot to look forward to. I know the Steelers are in the salary cap hole right now. They can get out of that pretty easily with several moves. And I'm sure we'll address a lot of these things as we go through the offseason here. But definitely reason to be optimistic, at least heading into next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the Steelers have been in this weird purgatory for quite some time where we can't really be good enough to compete for a title, but also not nearly bad enough to kind of get the premium assets that some other teams have used to get into title contention, right? We're kind of in that gray area. And I think you can exist in that area and still succeed as we have shown, but they have to make some changes to their approach this offseason. And the early indications, at least from what we're hearing from the top guys, makes me think that could be possible. But before we get into that, let's talk about the divisional games a little bit. Obviously that's what's going on in the NFL right now, what just happened this past weekend. And it puts into perspective where the Steelers are at right now, right? Like watching these teams that have made it this far, even some of the flawed teams that still have done a few things differently than maybe the Steelers have done to get to that divisional round level. I want to start with the Bucks Lions game actually, because that one to me is the most interesting to our situation because both of the quarterbacks for those two teams were guys that were kind of viewed as like mid-tier players at best, especially Goff prior to the last 2 years and Baker for much of his Cleveland Browns career, especially. And then he had obviously the rough year last year, bounced around, shows up in Tampa, balls out for them, does everything right, gets his team to this level. So these two teams were not built off the backs of franchise quarterbacks per se, right? Now, Tom Brady was there before Baker Mayfield, but Mayfield gets them a divisional, win. The Lions win their division as well with Jared Goff. Granted, playing much better than he did prior, but still. I think they are an interesting blueprint to how a team like the Steelers, who maybe don't have a surefire franchise quarterback, can still get to this level.
Yeah, I think that they show you that you can make it work under the right circumstances if you don't have that like upper echelon elite level quarterback. And so I think that most interesting thing to note though, Shayne, is of these teams in the Final Four here, look at the coaches of these teams. You've got Kyle Shanahan, you've got Ben Johnson and Dan Campbell in Detroit. You've got John Harbaugh and you've got Andy Reid. And so it's not a surprise these teams have gone as far as they have. Obviously, looks very different in the two conferences because you've got Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes squaring off this week, but then also you have Jared Goff, who's still in the race. Baker Mayfield was nearly there at this point, which I didn't think anybody would have thought that he would be either. So I do think there's reason to be optimistic that you can potentially get it done. And I think for Steelers fans specifically, Shayne, they should be rooting for Lions for multiple reasons. First of all, they haven't won their Super Bowl in 95 years and they have never won their championship. And secondly, if you can do it with Jared Goff, just maybe the Steelers can get back on track to where they need to be and turn things around as quick as next year. And so I think that Goff is a perfect example of a quarterback whose career was revitalized because of having Ben Johnson as the offensive coordinator these past 2 years. I mean, this was a contract that was looking to be dumped. The Rams went so far as to say, we're going to get an older, better quarterback in Matt Stafford, which worked out for them. But they had to eat a bunch of guaranteed money. They had to get rid of his contract and pay draft capital just to make that exchange. And so it looks like one of those rare scenarios where it's going to work out for both parties here. And then Baker Mayfield in the first round of the playoff goes off for like 336 yards and 3 touchdowns. And so a guy that's kind of been up and down in his career, but I feel like if those guys can make it work, it does give a little bit of hope for Steelers fans that if you don't have the Patrick Mahomes or the Josh Allen or the Lamar Jackson, that you can still compete for a Super Bowl.
Absolutely. And kind of goes back to the other NFC game too, where the NFC and AFC are very different in the sense that I think the AFC is a quarterback centric conference and the NFC
Yeah.
is a defense slash head coach centric conference, right?
Mhm.
A lot of the successful teams in the NFC have, not that the quarterbacks are bad necessarily, especially looking at the way Goff has played past 2 years, and Jalen Hurts had a rougher year this year, but is still very talented. Like some of the top teams in the NFC still have quarterbacks that are very good quality, but you look at the Niners-Packers game, right? Jordan Love, a young upcoming quarterback who does look to be getting up into that top 10 territory for sure, but still a young guy, really powered by a coach that is pushing all the right buttons in Matt LaFleur. And then you look at the Niners, right? Most people who understand the game understand that Brock Purdy is not by himself a top 5 quarterback, right? He is not a top 5 quarterback talent. He does not play like one independently of his team. But when you have the scheme Shanahan has and you have the playmakers that he has, you can get top 5 play out of Purdy a lot of the time. Now, in this past game,
Mhm.
definitely got bailed out by some drop picks, some other things. Had a really nice final drive, though, put it together. He does have the missing ingredient that Shanahan quarterbacks haven't had, which is I think just the mentality and the fortitude to deal with tough situations and not fold under pressure like Garoppolo has in the past and guys like that. But still, I mean, it's really a head coach centric, game in that game
Yeah.
especially. And the better, in my opinion, head coach and team won out ultimately despite the mistakes.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't agree more with the comments regarding Purdy, because I think you see like this team is top in the league yards after attempt year after year. And Purdy was really good, but I think that
Yes.
he's not on that level. And I think you can see that. And I think if you go like position by position, it's like, all right, where are the holes on the 49ers? Is it the offensive line? No, not really. I mean, they're really good there. Their skill positions are the best in the league. I mean, overall, top to bottom talent, like this 49ers team might be the most talented roster that we've seen since like the 90s 49ers. They're
Mhm.
that good. And you've got Hall of Famers everywhere on this team. And so I think that you can legitimately look at this roster and say, as good as Purdy was and efficient as he was this year, he still might be one of the weaker links on this roster because it's just so strong overall. But yeah, I agree. The coaching though matters so much, and it
It
shows you
does.
why, how valuable Kyle Shanahan is, that he can do it with whoever. I mean, he's been here time after time, and it doesn't really matter who his guy is.
Right, and I think that's the key factor here is like I do think that of the Shanahan Niners era quarterbacks, Purdy has the best skill set to fit into his scheme, right? But this is still a head coach and offensive weapon driven team that found a quarterback that is willing and able to do enough things outside of their scheme to help elevate them, right? Now I think they can be considered a true Super Bowl contender again, opposed to where before it felt like they were just one buzzsaw away, defense away from just not
Yeah.
being able to do it. And again, that still might happen if they face the Ravens or Chiefs again, right? Like that's
Mhm.
still going to be possible. But I do think if they get to the Super Bowl, they're going to have much better chance of actually winning it than they have at any other point during Shanahan's tenure. So that's really interesting for them. Moving to the AFC, again, quarterback centric conference. We're looking at obviously the Texans Ravens first. Definitely didn't go the way that a lot of people thought as far as it being a fun game, at least. It was definitely a blowout, especially after halftime. But
Yeah.
again, Lamar Jackson exercises some playoff demons, has 4 total touchdowns, over 250 total yards. Really efficient day for him. And Stroud, as good as he's been in his rookie year, this Ravens defense, coordinated by Mike McDonald, is just a different level than most other defenses in the NFL, and especially the ones left in the playoffs at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't surprised to see the outcome turn out the way it did. I thought that the
Right.
Texans would put up a little bit better of a fight, but
Right.
my goodness, Lamar is just as cool as a cucumber right now. And I feel
Yeah.
like that is the team to beat. I mean, that is
Mhm.
my Super Bowl favorite right now. They are riding high. And I feel like this could be the time where Lamar puts all of that criticism to rest. Yes, I am a postseason quarterback. Yes, I can do this. And so I think that the Steelers are going to have to deal with a nightmare in CJ Stroud for the next decade plus in the AFC.
Mhm.
But I just feel like it shows you how strong this Ravens roster is right now. And so not betting against them at all. However, it's so hard to get to bet against Patrick Mahomes this week as well, too. I mean, the guy's like 13-3 in the postseason. It's got like 33 touchdowns and 3 picks all time
Something
in class. It's
insane.
unbelievable. And
Something
so,
insane, yeah.
yeah, that's going to be a fun matchup, I think.
For sure. And again, like people, especially Steelers fans, are going to probably want to say, like, hey, well, we beat the Ravens twice this year. Why can't we compete with them? First of all, I think everyone can acknowledge the Week 18 game was basically just a farce. Like, we still struggled in that game, and they weren't playing their starters. And the other regular season game, I mean, I could have caught some of the passes Lamar was throwing that the receivers could. Like, it's just we got lucky. It's great that we do this, right? We force teams into these errors often. Something about playing the Steelers when you're a good team, it just frustrates them for some reason. But if you look at the way Lamar's played this year, going to probably have his second MVP. What scares me the most, and I wanted to touch on this for a second because we are going to be talking about the future of the Steelers and like what they have to do to compete. Lamar right now in the pocket is unflappable. You cannot make him jittery. You cannot make him upset in the pocket. He simply does not care. Like, there was moments in that Texans game, they were bringing pressure. They were sacking him, like they were getting to him, and he was taking sacks a couple of times. And it didn't matter because in the second half, he just kept playing his game, and they could not do anything about it in the second half. That's what's scary with, especially if Monken does stay as the offensive coordinator. If he doesn't get another job, he has been interviewing, but no guarantees he'll get one of those open opportunities. It's just scary to see a player with his athleticism not really care to use it unless absolutely necessary, because he can just spring it on you now. It doesn't have to be like, oh, you have to watch Lamar all the time, because now you can't do that. You can't just play, contain, and leave him in the pocket because you will get destroyed. It just is hard to watch as a Steelers fan and go, man, we could definitely keep this streak of beating them every year going. Like, it just doesn't feel good, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is the scary part. This is not Greg Roman's offense anymore. This is Lamar Jackson improving as a true pocket passing quarterback these days with the ability to take off and be the best runner in the league as well. And so I think that combination is scary. You've got Zay Flowers who can run after the catch. Odell kind of had a bounce back year. And so just their entire outlook moving forward. I mean, they've got a great head coach, one of the second longest tenured in the NFL currently next to Mike Tomlin. I think he came the year after in John Harbaugh. Coaching staff's good, roster's good. I mean, they're strong pretty much everywhere. And so they're just going to be a force to deal with for a while here. And I think they could do it all this year. I really do.
Yeah, me too, unfortunately. But real quick, before we talk about the last game, before we get into our next topic, we have a comment here from good old R. Barley. Barley, we never asked him, but Barley, I believe, 18. Do you think Con Weidl are taking more control of decisions than Colbert ever did? Colbert seemed to be a Tomlin yes man, where some decisions lately seem less 100% what Tomlin was. I do think that regardless of whether you think Colbert was a yes man kind of GM at times, I do think Con and Weidl certainly are influencing things more than I think Colbert did during his tenure, especially kind of in the middle to end part of it, where especially taking a tackle in the first round, right? Attacking corner in the basically first round with the 32nd pick. Like, taking guys who normally haven't been the priority in the first couple of rounds for the Steelers, right? That I think matters a lot. And the type of players too. You take the long athletic tackle, you trade up to get him even. You take the long athletic corner. Like, this is the type of decisions that we've been wanting in the draft that we haven't really been getting for a long time. And I think that is indicative of the way that Con wants to do things, that Weidl wants to do things as well. And that's part of when we get to the offseason and start talking more about what this team needs to do, I do feel more confident that some of those big decisions are going to be coming as a collective and not just Tomlin saying, hey, this is what I need for my roster.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I did get the impression these last 5 years with Tomlin Colbert that Tomlin did have a big hand in things in terms of the draft process. I'd like to see him be less involved there. I know that he said he's planning on being on the scouting trail once again this offseason. It's not that I don't want him there. It's just I want Con and Weidl to make these decisions. That's why they are the GM and assistant GM. And I think that they're good at what they do. And I think that they're both going to prove their track record here soon. It's just the biggest thing I've hated about the draft process, Shayne, these past several years is that the Steelers, I feel like they get themselves locked into a position. Like, we have a need at running back. We have to draft a running back. We've got a need at quarterback in 2022. We have to draft a quarterback. They did the same thing with Terrell Edmonds. They did the same thing with Devin Bush. Or like, there's 2 linebackers in this draft. We have to move up for one of them. Like, you cannot, the philosophy is so backwards. You cannot go in with the mindset that you have a void and you have to fill it. It needs to be, let's take the best players at the best positions. If you do that, you can build a Super Bowl caliber roster. You just have to be willing to be patient and willing to let other positions that might be a little bit more pressing to let those slide for a better player. And so I'm very optimistic with what we saw this past season. Now, I will say that in 2023, it just so happened that the best players available lined up with positions of need. So how much of that was the Steelers still following the old trends, and how much of that was saying, let's take the best players available? Because I love the value in last year's draft. I said it at the time. I was very adamant that they had knocked it out of the park. And I think that they did. I think that they crushed it last year. Keep that going though, and say, let's not get ourselves stuck in this trend. And I don't know how much of that was Mike Tomlin as opposed to Kevin Colbert. It's probably a collective effort between the two of them to say, yeah, we got to fill these holes. We got to be competitive. And I get that to a degree, but it just makes for bad malpractice, if you will, when it comes to the draft process. You have to do things with forward thinking mentality in trying to fill those holes.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I will say that's nice to see is I think Jones, especially, the fact that they moved up to get him, that it seemed like he was a target, not necessarily because he just happened to be the best player there, but because they wanted him in particular, makes me feel good. Like, Porter was certainly the best player on the board, in my opinion, at that point. Plus, it's too easy, right? I mean, like, if he wouldn't have been the pick, I would have been floored. But then you look at guys like Darnell Washington, who that was not necessarily a need, right? Like, you wanted a second tight end, but taking one in the third round, like, that wasn't necessarily like a guaranteed need or anything like that. And so I think the overall process has improved for them. I do think they care more about taking the right player and not just the right fit and the right need. And I do think, generally speaking, that is how you need to draft in the NFL, because if you draft a guy because of need, oftentimes you're taking a player that might not be the best fit and the best player at that spot. Now, sometimes it works out where it's both, and then that's great. That's when you hit a home run usually. But oftentimes it doesn't work that way, right? A draft doesn't tend to follow in exactly what needs you need. So, but last thing, but with the divisional round, of course, the big game, the one that everybody's talking about, the Bills-Chiefs game, the part 2 of the playoffs with Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. Not quite as much fireworks, but still a very good game across the board. But for the Bills, man, it just feels like Mahomes is insurmountable for them. And it really sucks, because I really think Allen is right up there with the very best in the league, next to Mahomes, with the Burrows, the Lamars of the world. And it just feels like either it's really not him in this game, it was his teammates at times, and Tyler Bass, of course, misses a kick. But overall, it just feels like they can't climb that mountain.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they can't quite get over it. And I mean, that if Josh Allen and the Bills can't quite climb that mountain, and we'll see if Lamar can climb that mountain, but if he can't do it, the Steelers certainly are in a rough spot trying to do it as well.
Yeah, he's just in a tough situation. And you said it. I think that he is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. I think that he can play with the best of them all. And we saw that in the 2021 playoff game that they had. It was just unbelievable. The best offensive performance collectively I've ever seen by a pair of quarterbacks, I think, in one game before.
Okay.
But the problem is, I feel like Josh Allen today is kind of like Ben Roethlisberger back in the day, dealing with Tom Brady every single year. And that's what Patrick Mahomes feels like at this point. I mean, he's been so successful in the postseason that, I mean, I would not be shocked at all if he gets his third Super Bowl win. It's just good. This is going to be a dynasty. I mean, it just simply is, because Mahomes is that good. And I feel bad for Allen. I mean, I feel bad for the Bills fans in general. I really do. I know that Steelers and Bills might have some bad blood after that game, whatever. I don't really care, but
whatever.
They get so close, and then they can just never quite get there. And that's kind of been the trend with them all along. And so Allen's just got an uphill battle. I mean, he's probably hoping that he doesn't have to revisit Pat Mahomes in the playoffs again next year, but it just seems like this matchup is one that's not going away anytime soon.
And the scary part for me is that this was the first road playoff game Patrick Mahomes has ever had to play, not counting the Super Bowl as a road. So, which is just a stupid thing to say for a guy who's 6 years into a starting, career. But it didn't matter. I think the Bills and the NFL were wondering, like, will it make a difference? Will Mahomes still just find a way, and his team find a way to figure it out? And they did. The Bills made more key mistakes. The Chiefs made some of their own. Mecole Hardman would love to have that fumble back and everything. That game's probably really over then. But they figured it out. And I think the thing with Mahomes that's so frustrating is his teammates this year on offense are not up to par. They just have not been. Rashee Rice has been great for rookie, but he's essentially just a point-and-click receiver and just hoping that he catches it and runs with it. Kelsey's still, very productive, but he's not the same player he was last year, the year before that, or any of that. And MVS catches the ball 50% of the time. So, it's just a crapshoot for them on offense most of the time. And in this game, it just didn't matter. The players made the plays when they needed them. It feels like Mahomes just has this ability in the playoffs to make everything around him settle down and sort out. It's like a calm overcomes that team, and they made the plays when they needed to, and the Bills didn't.
But I think that's the part that makes it the scariest, Shayne, is the fact that the Chiefs have just won 2 straight playoff games, and they could win the Super Bowl this year without any receivers. I mean, you got Rashee Rice and you've got an old Travis Kelce who's still making plays, obviously, but they did it last year after they traded away Tyreek Hill. I mean, I feel like this is the best time. This is the best chance you're going to get to knock them out.
I really do believe that, though, is that this was the year to do it.
Yeah. If they go out and trade for a receiver during the offseason, or they draft one in the first round, they'll be right back on top. Their offense will be even scarier next year. And it's been scary enough every year since Mahomes got here. And so you feel like their receiving core is legitimately dreadful outside of Rashee Rice. So you would feel like, all right, how are they still finding success? Mahomes, Andy Reid, you can never count these guys out. I mean, it legitimately looks like the new Tom Brady Belichick combination. Like they're just a powerhouse.
It's scary, but enough about other teams. Let's get into some Steelers specific conversations. So we know of one interview candidate so far with Zach Robinson, the passing game coordinator for the Rams. But outside of him, who could be the Steelers' next offensive coordinator? That's kind of the biggest question on the minds of fans right now as we enter the offseason, getting closer to the end of the season, where more and more guys are going to be have time to interview, are going to come free from different teams, going to be looking at different options. I think the Zach Robinson interview is very interesting to me, and it does give me hope that they're going in the right direction in terms of who they're looking for. But outside of a guy like him, and I'll have you start here, Tommy. What do you think, or who do you think could be potential candidates, or who would you be interested in them looking at for OC?
Yeah, I've said kind of throughout the process that Klint Kubiak is the guy that I would strongly have my eyes on right now. He's come from that Kyle Shanahan tree, the passing game coordinator. Obviously, the 49ers have had loads of success there, and he's only been with them for 1 year, but look at the yards per attempt numbers and everything that they were able to do. I just feel like show me the evidence we're picking from the offensive guy, at least from that Shanahan tree, where it's failed so far, because I feel like that is just a way to go. Now, Zach Robinson, a McVay guy, that's the next best thing, right? I still think that you could make a case that if you're not going to go there, go with one of those guys. Obviously the Chargers didn't have a great offense this past year. Several factors contributing to that. I still like the Zach Robinson interview there. But there are guys that I would steer clear of, though, like the retread guys and the guys who have not had a lot of success as of late, like the Pep Hamilton. Like that one does not interest me at all, because if you look at the way that the passing game was designed when he was there, as opposed to when the Texans go and flip and they get Bobby Slowick, who just knocked it out of the park. Obviously had CJ Stroud. That makes a big difference.
Certainly helps. Certainly helps. But yeah.
So, but there are certain guys, certain schemes that just don't, I just don't think would translate well. And I don't think would give the Steelers a big enough boost. So, and I don't pretend to be an expert to know every single one of these coordinator candidates. I have done some research on some of them, and it's the reason why I like a guy like Klint Kubiak. But I feel like if you are going to go do something that's totally different than what you've been doing, because I feel like Pep Hamilton is too close to like the Matt Canada scheme, where you're going to target things outside of the hashes. Like I looked at it, like even if you look at like next gen stats charts with like how Nico Collins was being used with Pep prior to how he was being used with like Bobby Slowick. And so I feel like that's one that I would probably steer clear of. And then Cliff Kingsbury, another name. I just see that pop up on here as well. So that's another one who's purportedly the Steelers have some interest in. They might bring in as well. I think that is a guy who kind of drew the short straw with what he had to work with there in Arizona before going back to the college game. So I think that one would be an interesting one as well. I think he's got enough innovation to his passing offense to make that work as well.
Yeah, I mean, that guy does make a lot of sense as far as Kubiak. Kingsbury getting an interview is very interesting. I think with the Bears getting Shane Waldron as offensive coordinator, as I believe where he ended up, right? Waldron was the top guy that I was interested in of the retread per se, guys that have done this before, have called plays before, because he is off of that McVay tree, right? He has that background. He had success with the Seahawks with both Russell Wilson and Geno Smith. I think he would make a ton of sense as somebody who both Tomlin and Weidl and Khan would be interested in because of his experience calling good offense recently. But without him out there, like you said, Kubiak makes a lot of sense. I think Robinson and Kingsbury being in the conversation is very interesting and promising.
It's encouraging,
overall. Yeah, I think it's promising. Another guy that I've heard, Darrell Bevel, passing game coordinator for the Dolphins right now, that also makes a ton of sense from like a schematic standpoint of what you're trying to accomplish. The main thing I'll say is I think as long as they go with one of two prototypes, someone who has prior and preferably recent success calling plays at the NFL level, right? Somebody who has shown the ability to do that, especially with a team that maybe wasn't powered by a offensive head coach or a quarterback that was all world, right? Somebody like that. Or a young, promising McVay Shanahan disciple, right? That's kind of the two directions I think you can go and have a very high chance of success, right? Like you're not probably going to strike out entirely by doing one of those two things.
Yeah, and I think that you need that guy with the niche. You need the guy that can help the passing game specifically, because I trust the running game
I
to be
think,
solid no matter
I
what.
think so
I feel
too.
like at this point. So if they're going to go with a new coordinator, and they obviously are, I'm thankful that they're looking outside the organization, because like we just said before, I feel like people would have caught on to Eddie Faulkner very quickly in Mike Sullivan. So get the guy with experience, or get the guy that has just the passing game mastermind, and hope that he can be that next guy. Hope that he can be that next Ben Johnson. But like we said, Shayne, the issue with, if you do find one of those guys, they're going to get snatched up pretty quick. I mean, it takes a year or two. Like Bobby Sloak, already one season with the Texans, and he's a head coach candidate because of what he was able to help do there. As much as it might have been CJ Stroud as well, a joint effort there. Those guys go fast for head coaching jobs. And so not that I'm obviously rooting for tremendous success for whoever the OC is next. Just if they're really good, don't expect them to stay very long. That's the problem.
Yeah, I think the main thing that I think that teams need to start doing with that situation is, one, if it's very clear that your head coach is not the answer, to start promoting those guys that are at OC who are running an offense that's working really well, right? And obviously that doesn't apply to everyone. Like a lot of people are saying, like we're saying that maybe it's best if Dan Campbell, just kind of goes off and lets Ben Johnson coach the Lions moving forward. I've even heard people say that. And as much as that hurts to say, kind of, because everybody loves Dan Campbell and he should be the coach there, it's rooted in like something that's a fair argument, right? Of like what happens to the Lions next year when Ben Johnson is coaching, whoever it is, the Commanders or whatever. You don't know for sure, right? Like you hope that someone on that staff can replicate a lot of what Johnson wanted to do in his scheme. But we've seen with the Eagles, right, this year especially, they're kind of the king example of what happens when you lose your coordinators and you don't have a good plan to deal with that, right? So it's going to be tough, but we'll see. I think that they have multiple opportunities here, though, to get this right. And there's certainly some wrong choices, in my opinion, but we'll get to that once we know who the offensive coordinator actually is.
But, and Shayne, one more thing. You mentioned the Eagles there. I actually tweeted that out this morning.
I saw that.
Losing Shayne Steichen was just a tremendous loss for them, because now they've already wiped out Brian Johnson, their coordinator they've had for 1 year. And it makes you wonder, there's a case to be made, because I bet if the Eagles could go back and do it, they would have kept Steichen instead of Sirianni, because what is Sirianni's
crazy, but it's true.
I know, because the offense and the team in general took just such a big, they lost Jonathan Gannon, defensive coordinator as well, but the team in general, and specifically on offense, they took such a big step back this year. It makes you wonder if going with the guy and keeping the guy that has the niche as that passing game guy or the offensive coordinator type is better than keeping the head coach, your current head coach at times. And so again, you talk about Ben Johnson. I think there's a case to be made with him. So, but that's just where we are with the Steelers right now. I would love to get in a situation where we have a Shayne Steichen or a Ben Johnson to lose. So I'll put it that way.
Let's get to that part before we worry about that. That happens a lot, right? Yeah, that's totally fair. But our main topic today, and this is going to be what we spend, most of the time that we have today on, what can the Steelers do to compete in a brutal AFC? right now. This is a little bit different than doing like a mock offseason necessarily, because we'll get into more stuff like that as we get closer to the true offseason start once the Super Bowl's over and everything. But this for me, I think, was just a chance for us to kind of talk out like what things do we think are possible the Steelers can do to get back into contention? What things would we want to see them do, whether it's realistic or not? Like that's kind of what I want this conversation
Yeah.
to start. So let's start with kind of the big one that everyone is going to be harping on throughout the process, outside of offensive coordinator, because we talked about that. What could the Steelers do this season to get better at quarterback to make themselves more competitive in the AFC?
Yeah, I think there's just a couple thought processes here that the Steelers, and you need to explore everything. I mean, every option should be on the table. This offense was atrocious last year, averaged 16 some odd offensive points per game.
Yeah.
And that the quarterback play needs to get better. I mean, it was collectively was a bottom 5 unit in terms of quarterback play last year. So regardless of what Mike Tomlin said, I know that he gave a glowing endorsement for Kenny Pickett and just a immediate yes when asked if the quarterback is on the roster. I know all of that.
Right.
I'm not convinced that he believes that still,
No.
and even with spending that first round pick, and he shouldn't, because we just haven't seen enough yet. I mean, Pickett had 6 touchdown passes in 13 games last year. It's not enough. And so I think that a couple of different routes you can go here. First of all, Shayne, what I would say is, although the Steelers offense is young, their defense is not so young. Old, in fact, because Cameron Hayward turns 35 years old this offseason. TJ Watt's going to be 30 early in the season. Those are your 2 best players, your 2 most important players, at least on defense. If you are set on making things work right now and making that Super Bowl run right now, while you have your 2 best players, and one of them is a Hall of Famer for sure, you need to make this work right now. And if that means throwing money at Kirk Cousins, and I dare I say, because I hate the thought of doing this, tacking on a couple voidable years with money thrown in the future. If you need to capitalize on that window now to make it work with TJ Watt while he is still an elite defensive player, and Cameron Hayward while he's still a very good player, if healthy, then make it work. Because I think that that's probably option number 1 that you should be exploring, quite honestly, because every other option is going to make your window a little bit less open than what that option would be. I think that Kirk Cousins, I mean, get this for a second. Kirk Cousins has had more seasons of 100+ pass rating in the last 4 years than Ben Roethlisberger had in his 18-year career. And I'm not saying that this to argue that he's a better quarterback than Ben or anything that way.
Right. Different.
But Cousins has been really underrated. I really think he has. He's just Mr. Reliable, so consistent. He works every angle of the field, and he's just so smart with the football. And so I think that guy, you could go from a 10-win team to a 12, maybe 13-win team with Cousins. Like, I think the roster is good enough that as long as you don't botch the OC decision here, I think you can be a 12 to potentially 13-win team with Cousins immediately, contend at least for that bye. And even if you don't get that, you're a team that could advance through the rounds of the playoffs and potentially get there. I think that gives them the best chance with the final window of the Watt Hayward window, because this is it. I think it's probably this one more year with Watt and Hayward together. Obviously, Watt's going to give you several more years, but as he gets into his 30s, I don't know where that window is going to go. Your other option, Shayne, is if you don't go that route, the free agent pickings are slim. I don't think that Baker's going to be on the table. He's projected like 2 years, $95 million for
Bucks are going to give him a deal.
They're going to retain him for sure. I'm not a Russell Wilson fan to bring him in at this point or anything, even if he gets
not as a guaranteed starter now.
No, like that one, I'm not even guaranteed is a significant increase from what you have. I think the play has just been so baseline level. So the other option to me, honestly, Shayne, I think that if you're not going to do that, there's the Justin Fields options via trade. I know that Benjamin Albright said the Bears are not going to get a first round pick out of him. It'll be at most 2 seconds. Maybe a second and a third gets it done. I would be intrigued by that, even with a contract looming for him, because if you do something like that, you've already got a great run game. You add one of the best running quarterbacks to that. Even if the pass EPA, everything is just average, that could get you a win or 2 better. That could make you a scarier team.
It gives them an edge, I think, for sure.
Yes, that if Fields is consistent enough for a 3-game stretch in the playoffs, it could potentially do the trick for you. And then the third option would be go the NFL draft route and cut your losses and say, I know that we didn't do this right with Pickett. We didn't do our due diligence. we locked ourselves into a quarterback in a bad quarterback class. We're going to cut our losses. We're going to say, even though he was the 20th overall pick a couple of years ago, he's now going to be our backup quarterback. Obviously he can come in and compete. We're not going to make anything official yet. If he blows us out of the water, whatever, starts the season off as our starter, that's fine. But we're going to go in and we're going to look for all options. We are going to do our homework on the quarterback class. We're going to explore these guys in the first round, potentially even with a slight trade up. You're probably not going to get one of the top 3 quarterbacks this year. But that next group of McCarthy and Bo Nix and Michael Penix, are those guys an upgrade over Kenny Pickett? And if they are, can we add them to our roster? If we get, in my mind, Shayne, a 10% increase at quarterback is even more important than adding a bookend offensive tackle or another cornerback, because nothing is more important than the quarterback play. We saw that late in the year. Once we had a coordinator change, we saw that just the competence and the poise of Mason Rudolph being in there even was enough to elevate the points per game by like a touchdown more per game. And it was a small sample size, but I think that if you were able to get a significant upgrade at quarterback, that's more important than what you can do. So you can't, what we can't do is we can't look at this draft process and say, well, we just drafted a quarterback 2 years ago. We can't even think about that. That's the wrong mentality. Your mentality needs to be, we've got to explore every option that makes this team better. And knowing that we probably don't have the quarterback of the future on the team right now, is there one in this draft class? This is a good quarterback draft, in my opinion, much, much better than the one in 2022. And I'm genuinely believe, and I've got a lot more homework to do. I have done a couple of film sessions already. So I've logged several hours of film on the top couple of the top 6 or so prospects. I think the top 6 guys, every single one of the top 6 guys would have been the top quarterback in the 2022 class had they been in that year. I mean, if the window would have lined up, these prospects that I'm examining right now, they all would have been better than Pickett. They all would have been better than Malik Willis, which, by the way, Malik Willis ended up as the top quarterback on the consensus board in 2022, which shows you how bad the class was overall. So yes, you could get an upgrade with these quarterbacks, but I think that's the third option. It's Kirk Cousins. It's a trade for Justin Fields, and it's exploring a quarterback in the first 2 rounds, realistically, to give you that upgrade at that position. Otherwise, you're more or less going to be stuck with more of the same, I think, moving forward. And you're just going to have to trust that coordinator change is going to be enough to make a significant difference.
Yeah, like there's not much I can really argue with that. I do want to touch on a little bit all of that for you. So the Cousins route is very interesting because of the fact that it's going to be a 1 or 2 year thing at most. I think if you hire a Zach Robinson or someone else from the McVay tree in particular, and of course a Shanahan tree too, it makes that make way more sense as well. He is kind of the prototype, like ideal quarterback for that system, and he's shown it with Kevin O'Connell. He's shown it what he was with Shanahan, at points and whenever he was in that type of offense. Like for me, if you're going to do that route, the offensive coordinator pick has to be one of those tree guys. Now, I think it should be anyway, most likely, but I think especially if they make that decision, it really kind of changes what they want to do offensively to what Cousins is going to be able to do right away. Well, right. There's not going to be a learning curve there, most likely. So that would make a lot of sense. The Fields angle, the trade, some actually chat right here. Everyone questions Fields throwing, rightfully so. So he's better than Kenny even before you add the legs. Fair enough. He's definitely had more success.
Yeah.
I think the problem with the Fields trade is the fact that it's essentially a 1 year tryout, and then you have to decide what his future is, right? And I think trading even day 2 capital for a quarterback that you don't already have a deal set up with, that you don't know for sure is going to be the starter past that year, is a little scary to me. And I do think it's something that the Steelers would also kind of shy away from. So I will say that. So Cousins, I think I have a medium level of interest in that. The Fields trade, although I do like Fields' talent, I do wonder if that's worth it. The free agency, again, so we're not worried about that as much with Cousins. I think the draft aspect, I haven't gotten to start watching prospects yet. That's going to start this week. So I am going to be doing a scouting pod, just throwing that out there. If you follow me on Twitter, you might see me tweet about that. So I am going to be doing a lot of scouting, and quarterbacks included, just because I'm not just scouting for the Steelers, I'm scouting for across the league. So I'm curious to see if those bottom 3 guys that aren't going to be probably taken in the first 10 picks, what they look like and how I feel about them, because I do think if one of those 3 are clearly an upgrade day 1 from the Pickett-Rudolph combination or whatever they end up doing with Rudolph, that could also be probably the smartest decision, right? It just
Mhm.
depends on, what you think of those players, and I'm kind of mixed based on reviews I've seen from other people. So those three are definitely the ones that are probably the most interesting. But what I think is going to happen, Tommy, I think that they're going to bring in some sort of veteran competition, whether it's Rudolph being brought back, whether it is a Russell Wilson type or a Jacoby Brissett type or whatever, right? I think that's what's going to be done to compete with Pickett, and that ultimately, unless he clearly isn't better than that veteran competition, Pickett is going to get that third year in a new offensive system to prove that he is not the guy. And I
Mhm.
know a lot of fans are going to be upset about that. I honestly am very pessimistic about that idea myself, but I just feel like that is where it's trending.
Yeah, Shayne, I got to say this. If the Steelers go into next year and their plan is we're going to bring in, or we got Pickett as our starter, we're going to bring in Mason Rudolph for competition to drive him. I mean, they're just not serious about trying to win a Super Bowl. I'm sorry. I feel like that's where we're at this point, where it's like, all right, how much of a sample do you need? And now I know that I have no question in my mind that Pickett can improve with an offensive coordinator change. I think that we
Yeah.
saw that already. And even though he only played one game after they made the switch to Eddie Faulkner, topped 400 yards for the first time in 56. I can't remember how many
Whatever it
games.
was. It doesn't
Absurd number of games.
it can't hurt us anymore, so we don't have to worry
No,
about
but it was one game sample, and he still only scored 16 points in that game. And so
it.
the
Should have
point
been 20
totals
plus, but still, yeah.
should have had the drop touchdown pass from
Yeah.
Deontay there. But having said that, I've watched a lot of Pickett now. I mean, we've
Mhm.
got a 25 game sample of Pickett and in my mind, Shayne, like the guy is playing kind of how I thought he would be. He was my 48th overall player in the
Right.
draft. I was not high on him. I had a late second round grade, a mid second round grade on Kenny Pickett. And so he's kind of performing how I expect him to. But at the same time, I almost don't care who the coordinator is, because if you're 25 games into your career and you've got 13 touchdowns and 13 picks in 4,000 passing yards, 79 passer rating, that's kind of all I need to know. I mean, it to me, like the chances that he turns out at this point as a 26-year-old quarterback in year 3 is just so slim. Like you got to defy every odd at this point to be a guy who is not a touchdown throwing quarterback and to come around and all of a sudden you're a productive guy who can lead this team to a Super Bowl. Like I firmly believe that he can be good enough to manage the game, to get things done, to get you back to 9 or 10 wins. But if you want to win a Super Bowl, this is not the right route to go. And I will put that out there right now, and I'll argue with anybody who thinks otherwise. Shayne, if you want to argue with me right now, let's do it. Let's put up your dukes, because I think if the Steelers want to win a Super Bowl, this is not the route to go. You've got to try something else. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and expecting different results. And you're going to get the exact same results. Even if you have a coordinator change, your offense might go up a little bit. You might scale back towards like the 20-point margin a game. It's still not going to be enough with these guys.
Yeah, so I will not be fighting you on that, so you don't have to worry about putting your gloves on. No, I think that just because I think it's what's going to happen, obviously does not mean I think
Yeah.
that's what should happen. And I think the problem is the Steelers, obviously we know this about them. They are loyal to a fault. And sometimes it's great and sometimes it's not. The end of the Ben era was certainly messy because of that, the loyalty to him and allowing him to kind of go out there and just trudge through it and try to figure it out. The loyalty to guys on defense at times, having the veterans play over young guys, even this past year for a lot of the year when they were clearly not the best options out there on the field. Like there's an element of the way the Steelers do things that is respectable but isn't smart all the time, right? And I
Mhm.
wonder if this season ending the way it did, the way that the season went, having to climb out of a 7-7 hole after losing to teams that you clearly are better than, I wonder if Tomlin sees the writing on the wall of, okay, I cannot continue to coach and run this team the same way I've always done it and expect it to get better. That's why I do think that there's more of a chance than ever that we could see a big move at a position and so important as quarterback. But it just feels like they're setting this thing up to give Kenny a chance because partially they didn't get to
Mhm.
see him in this offense without Canada full time. They didn't get to see if he could have replicated a lot of what Rudolph did success wise. Maybe it would have looked different, but the success may have still been there. It's just, I think that's what's ultimately going to happen. And I do agree, though, that it's not going to
Mhm.
lead to a Super Bowl. It could lead to a better record, even. It could lead to maybe a playoff win with a better offense and a healthy defense, if we can get to that point. But I do think it's capped because even though the touchdown numbers, so I want to say this because it's a very big talking point for good reason, because it's odd for a quarterback to play this
Mhm.
many games and not have, the amount of touchdowns he should. The one thing I will say is that nobody in this offense with Canada or without him has been able to put the ball in the end zone through the air at a rate above average or even average, right? It
Yeah.
feels like this offense just simply doesn't throw the ball to the end zone enough. And I think
Mhm.
part of it is the lack of red zone opportunities and then the failures in the red zone. So I will say I don't really
Yeah.
care about the touchdown numbers as much as I do about the fact that even with a better offensive coordinator, like you said, Tommy, I just don't think Pickett's ceiling is high enough to
Mhm.
justify not trying to upgrade from him already. That's what it ultimately comes
Yeah.
down to.
And that's incredibly fair. But Shayne, I think you and we both said this before, but the Steelers did themselves an incredible disservice last offseason when they did not fire Matt Canada. I
Right.
don't care how many years he's got left on
It
his
doesn't
contract.
matter. Yeah.
2-year sample size, and we saw nothing from this
No,
offense. It
absolutely not.
progressively went downhill. To give him that third season was just complete malpractice. It
Yeah.
should have never happened because we knew that Canada was a problem, and we had a hunch that Pickett could be a problem as well.
Mhm.
But we knew that one was a problem, and that guy should have been
Yes.
gone.
Right.
Make the switch. I don't care if you're saying, oh, we don't want him to have to deal with another coordinator change. I'm sure he would have gladly dealt with that change if it
Been
means that
fine.
it's going to be better for his career path. So
Yeah.
they should have made the switch last year, started that coordinator process, hire from outside the organization, bring in a fresh mind, and then we would have a much clearer picture of who Kenny Pickett is at this point. Because in a lot of ways, yeah, we are kind of sitting blind here, but you and I are going off of our initial assessments on him now, saying, all right, we didn't love the total package coming in. We didn't love that he kind of had just a pedestrian arm for the position, that he was an older prospect. I mean, there's a lot of red flags out there,
Yeah.
smallest hands ever for a quarterback. I mean,
Yeah.
how much of those things matter? I don't know individually, but when you add them all together, maybe there is something to it. Maybe that's
Mhm.
part of the reason why. I don't know, but we needed to see that year last year, and shame on the Steelers for not giving us that year disconnected from Matt Canada, where we could see Pickett in a whole year. Now we've got to do this another time potentially, and so now the problem is, Shayne, if Pickett also sucks, then we just wasted a whole nother year of TJ Watt in his prime and soon to be exiting in that prime, probably, unfortunately, Cameron Hayward on his last legs here. Like, why are we wasting another year of this when you should have done this before? I hate to live in the past. I know that it is what it is. There's so many decisions, like these head scratching decisions, like Steelers, what are you doing here? We should have been able to see this coming, and now we just got to live with it. And so I'm hoping that if the Steelers stick with Pickett, they get that coordinator who can make it work, that you can jumpstart your career again, like Jared Goff, like we talked about, where that Lions team, they were like a 3-win team. And then Ben Johnson gets there and they completely revitalized. They're a team that can contend for Super Bowl now. So I'm hoping that they can do something with that.
Yeah, and I think there's obviously the phrase or the saying that hindsight is 2020. Well, I think it was 2020 regardless of I think we saw it clearly at
Yeah.
the time too, right? And I think that is the thing that may have broke the camel's back though, right? Because ultimately with him firing him not quite midseason but close to it, I feel like Tomlin realized okay, we can't do this type of stuff anymore. And I think that even though it may be, a situation where you have sacrificed Kenny Pickett to the football gods, possibly, I think if it works out ultimately, then that was worth it. Unfortunately, for Kenny, I think that if he gets
Mhm.
another shot, I do obviously hope, and we're not saying that we
Oh
don't
yeah.
want him to
Yeah.
be good, but it's hard to imagine him taking the type of leap he would have to take in order to get this team where we think they should be or where they could be with a different alternative, right?
Mhm.
That's kind of the issue with it. So again, I think it's what's going to happen. If they don't, I'll be pleasantly surprised if they bring in either legit competition or someone who's just better than him outright and will beat him out. But that remains to be seen. So the other main thing I wanted to talk about, though, other than we're going to get more into the draft and stuff like that, so we don't want to spend too much time on that yet. But what can they do with the defense and the age and the cap issues and everything, there's a lot of guys who are going to get cut. We imagine there's a chance that Larry Ogunjobi might even be gone with still 2 years left on his deal. He had a really rough season, especially with Benton breaking out as a rookie. Kind of play that other interior spot for pass rushing downs and everything like that. Trubisky, we assume, hopefully, not going to be on this football team. Other guys, of course, in there too that you can cut or restructure to get plenty of cap space. What would you want to see them do? And it doesn't have to be specific players, although if you can think of any, that's great. What would you want to see them add specifically to the defense to kind of shore up some of the issues that we've seen, even with the scoring defense being good and everything like that? Like we've given up a ton of yards the past 2 years, especially. What would you want to see them do in free agency at least?
Yeah, well, first of all, Shayne, there's plenty of avenues to free up that money. Like you were talking about some of those decisions already. Trubisky's going to be gone. You just cannot justify keeping
no reason to keep him
around for $7.25 million. I think is his price tag.
Yep, whatever it is.
Allen Robinson's the easiest offseason decision a
maybe
GM can ever make.
Yeah, it's
save $10 million for a guy that averaged 5.7 yards,
280 yards as a full-time receiver.
I mean, just horrendous. And I know that some people say, I actually had somebody messaged me this morning on Twitter and said, well, Robinson had some big third down plays. I'm like, yeah, that's true, but you ain't worth that money. No. There's not a chance that you're worth the fraction of that.
And worth like 4 third down conversions.
Yeah. And so where Steelers lie right now, Shayne, they're 15 million in the cap hole. They're 19 in effective cap space, which means that in the hole, which means that after displacement costs, and you have to go and assume, once I get rid of these players, I got to sign guys that's going to cancel that out a little bit. So they got some work to do. They can get back out of there. Now, going to back to your question, there are certainly holes on this defense. There's going to be a lot of roster turnover. Like I had a tweet, I think it was last week, maybe. You could make a case that Joey Porter is the only cornerback that should be on the roster next year among the guys they have right now. Levi Wallace, a free agent. Shannon Sullivan's a free agent. Neither should be brought back, in my opinion. Patrick Peterson should be a cap casualty, in my opinion. I don't think the play was good enough to keep him around on that last year. And I certainly don't want to tack on avoidable year or anything for a player of his caliber at this point. So I think the most important thing you can do for defense, you've got to find a corner that can play opposite Joey Porter. I think that's priority number one when it comes to the defensive side of things. If you don't have that guy, you're always just a sitting duck out there. And there's always a guy that you can pick on, whether it's Levi Wallace or Peterson or whatever their equivalent is next year. You cannot make another decision in free agency. And I hate to go back and try to toot my own horn here, but I didn't like the Levi Wallace signing. I didn't like the Patrick Peters signing. I was very adamant about both of those things. I did not like the Shannon Sullivan signing when that happened right around the draft. And all of those decisions, it's like you are getting an older, washed up. Now, Wallace wasn't that old, but he's not athletic and he's slow. And so you're getting these guys that don't have speed in the secondary, but they're good tacklers and whatnot. And you're expecting them not to get picked on. I mean, this turned out kind of exactly how I thought it would. And so you need more of the Joey Porter types. You need these guys who can run and cover and stay hip to hip, stride for stride with these more athletic wide receivers. And so I think, in my opinion, Shayne, the only ones that should be on the roster next year are Joey Porter, Darius Rush, because the guy is under contract for one more year. He's cheap. And then Corey Trice, who's had the ACL injury. Why not give Rush and Trice one more chance to see what they can do? Maybe one of them turns out to be a rotational guy or a dime guy or something that you can use. But realistically, you're either going to have to draft a cornerback high or you're going to have to spend big on one. Don't piece your money out to get a subpar cornerback. And that's the problem that the Steelers have been doing year after year. They've pieced out their money to get a mid-level at best corner, and it just hasn't worked out for them. You either need to spend and go out and get yourself the Jamil Dean type, that type of player. And I need to do more research on who's hitting the market this year, because I really haven't looked at free agency recently. But that's the type of cornerback that if you're going to spend in free agency, you need to go that route. Otherwise, it's probably happening early in the draft.
That's my thing. I think with corner specifically, and I know we said we're not going to talk too much about the draft yet. We're going to save that for throughout the offseason, talk about different players and different positions that the Steelers might target. But if you do not add a starting outside corner in free agency that is actually starting caliber, it does not have to be necessarily a world beater. The guy that comes to mind that I don't think is going to ultimately hit the market, I think they're going to keep him in some capacity, but we already showed interest in him. Jalen Johnson of the Bears. That would be the primo, like, perfect
Yeah.
fit for what
Oh,
we
yeah.
would need opposite Joey. Now, will he hit the market, period? Will the Steelers be willing to offer him the deal that he wants? Who knows? But that would be obviously kind of like corner number one on my mind. That would make sense for them. If you can't get a guy like that, or you just can't get a true starter on the outside, I think the first pick in the draft, even though I think tackle is kind of what a lot of people have been mocking to them or talking about them, I think it very much becomes in play for that pick, right? I think 20 is a prime position to get probably one of the top 4 corners. Maybe not your pick of them, depending on how the draft rolls around, but probably one of those 4 guys. You know, a lot of people have talked about Kool-Aid McKinstry. He's kind of the most like logical scheme fit because he's a pure press man, like up in your face corner that we clearly are interested in with a guy like Joey. Now, maybe they don't want an exact, copy of the type of play that they get from Joey, but if you do, he would make a lot of sense. But if you can't get a starting outside corner for agency, I think it immediately becomes one of our top draft needs. And I think if you can't get an outside corner for agency, looking at the slot corner market would be super good because right now we do not have a true every down, especially slot corner on the roster. So getting somebody like that, if you can't get an outside corner, or vice versa, if you get an outside corner in free agency, then one of your mid-round picks, you better be looking at a slot type, right? Like try to build the secondary out so that Joey's not all by himself out there, right? Like you don't want him to have to do that. Same thing with Minka, right? If we want to get Minka back to his all-pro form, he has to be able to play as a true over-the-top safety. He has to be able to be that ball hawking type, and you can't do that if nobody can cover anywhere except for one side of the field. So I think that that's definitely a big place or a big thing they need to do in the offseason through free agency in the draft to shore that up for sure. Any other spots on the defense in particular you want to see them attack in free agency?
I mean, interior defensive line is an option depending on what they do with Ogunjobi. I mean, Hayward's going to be 35 years old this offseason, and they've got some interesting contract situations here. I mean, Cameron Hayward and Minka Fitzpatrick have a combined cap hit of almost $45 million this year. I know those are good football players. That's too much for a safety, even one the caliber of Minka, and it's too much for Cam Hayward at this stage in his career. Right. So I expect him to do something with those contracts, restructured, maybe an extension for Hayward with some voidable years potentially tacked on there. They'll try to do something to get the cap situation down. But I do think that if the decision is up to me, Shayne, I don't think I can go. I don't think I can run it back with Larry Ogunjobi. I just don't think I can do it. I don't think the play is what it needs to be. Now, the problem is you just gave him a 3-year, $29 million contract last offseason. And so you'll eat $7 million of dead money if you cut him. Can you find a trade partner? I don't know if anybody's going to want to take on that deal or not. I mean, when you look at it this way, you trade, the Steelers would still pay the guarantees. And so it makes the cap a lot more manageable for the team receiving him. So it is possible to do. The other option with him is if you do decide like nobody wants this guy at this price or whatever, and just not productive at all the last 2 seasons and didn't grade out well the last 2 seasons, you could make him a post June 1st cut. And then you can save almost $10 million. And that makes it a lot more intriguing rather than the $6 million saving that you would have with Ogunjobi if you were to cut him beforehand. So there are options with that contract. I personally would like to get out of that, assuming that you can free up enough beforehand to go and find somebody to kind of fill that hole maybe. But I just have not been impressed enough for the contract he got. And I said it at the time, I was not a fit. I think that was one of Khan's worst decisions so far. Not that he's made a lot of egregious things, like the draft was great and everything last year, but I was not a fan of giving that much up for a player of Larry Ogunjobi's caliber. And I think part of the reason why they did was they wanted to cover their bases to make sure they had some depth there because the D-line market was getting snatched up really fast in free agency last year. And I think they wanted to make sure they had an option there.
I do think that's what happened with that. I do think that, again, the market was pretty crazy, right? Like, I really think that that's what ultimately got him the deal that was probably not worth, obviously, what he's done or what he did even with us. I think his first year was definitely better than this past year, but it still doesn't really equal the contract he got. So I think they're going to try to get out of that one, most likely, like you said. If they don't need the cap for the first wave of free agency, then I do think post-June 1st cut would make a lot of sense. It would save them more money overall. So that's definitely one to monitor too. But overall, I think you're right. Like getting more help, even though I do think Benton can and should be the full-time starter, right? I think that he should be that. Like I think they should go into this offseason with the plan of making him the full-time starter next to Cam. I think he can handle the snap count. I think he's by far the best pass rusher that's not Cam Hayward when he's healthy, like not even close. And I think he's good enough in the run game, right? He's showed a lot of ability to stack and shed and kind of get off guys. Like he just is the best player on that interior right now, sans a healthy Cam Hayward. And even then, we don't know. Next year, maybe Cam even isn't the best interior player on this team, right? If he really shows out. So something I wanted to mention here too, I got a chat here before we get out of here. Cam said he won't take a pay cut and needs to go. Sorry. Well, they're not going to let him go. I'm pretty confident about that. But the thing is, with the pay cut situation, he did say he won't play for less money. With the contract restructure, it's not going to be less money to him. It's just going to change how that money impacts the cap. So, yeah, if they do that, he won't say no to that. I don't think, right? Like that's not going to be an issue. So, overall, though, I think that, that's a good place for us to start talking about this offseason. But obviously, we'll get more and more into it as the offseason continues and as we find out more about what they actually do, what the reports are that they're going to want to do. So definitely stick with us. Just so everybody knows, again, we will be going live, hopefully 2 times a week, obviously most of the time, every Tuesday and Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. on the Still Curtain YouTube channel. So check us out those days as well. If you guys want to, of course, if you want to keep track of what we're talking about, what we're doing, you can follow us at Tommy Jaggi for Tommy here and at Shayne Kubas for me. And if you guys have any questions for us during the offseason, any ideas you want us to mull over, definitely let us know on Twitter or in the YouTube comments. So thank you guys for joining us. Tommy, always nice having you, of course, and we'll see you guys next time.